Welcome. I'm Frank Klesitz. Brian, say hi.
Well, hello. Nice to meet you. Good to see you, Frank.
Good to see you too. Everybody's here because they want to learn how to get more listings from their database. I figure you're a wonderful person to share what's working, as I had in the write-up why you guys registered here. Brian's been running a real estate team 17 years, runs a mastermind with Metrix Mastermind. Some of the top agents in the country joined that, sharing ideas. He was over at Homeward, meeting with agents all over the country, let alone running his own real estate team and expansion teams all over the country: Phoenix, Portland, Las Vegas, Michigan. Brian's business is predominantly lots of cold calling, outbounding type of marketing. But times are shifting, times are changing, and Brian has some really good insights. He can't even still put on a webinar, so we're here. So let's just kind of go through really quick what we're going to cover today. Oh, again, by the way, I'm Frank Klesitz with a company called Viral Marketing, VYRAL. That's why I'm here. Brian, let's go over today the 36 touch marketing plan that you recommend. Like, what should be what's the marketing plan people should be sending out to their list? Second, I want to know offers for immediate response. What's the lead generation messages? If you're going to put a Facebook ad or a radio ad or an email going out trying to turn a lead, what does that message say?
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to talk about, you've really gotten your act together, whether it's, W-2 or VA ISAs or appointment setters, or getting your independent contractor agents to make calls, but like setting the appointments from all this. And then I do know that we're probably coming back with more distressed properties. Maybe it's on its way. Expireds, maybe you're seeing those tick up. What you're doing with expired and maybe cancel listings. Fair enough?
A lot to cover today, Frank.
All right, we got 30 minutes.
Let's do it, man. I appreciate you having me. I do think I know everyone, and you meet with a lot of great agents around the country. I think everyone's got a unique perspective or unique angle. I, of course, think mine's unique as well, because my background and my professional world is rather diverse. Like, you've touched on a lot of what I've been involved in, but especially this past few years between the real estate sales team and more specifically working alongside Tim Heil at Homeward, and as well as building, our Metrix Masterminds. Ben Kinney's my partner in that. And so I think, Frank, aside from you, I may be talking to more top producing agents around the country than most anybody. I know that you are as well, but yeah. I share that because I've got a fair amount of input or individuals I'm able to discuss or interview or work alongside. And my objective, I think, today, Frank, is to share my personal experiences, but also what I'm learning out in the field, and hopefully, share with the audience today.
So what do you hear in the market? What's going on? Give me the temperature of what people are dealing with right now when you talk to them.
It's interesting. So here we are, end of year. I would tell you, like, when things started shifting most recently, right? Like, we saw rates start creeping and markets start shifting. We saw pockets kind of moving faster than other areas. Places like Phoenix, which is where I reside, which always leads the charge. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a really bad thing. We started feeling it here first, but now you're really seeing it across the nation. I'll tell you, it's probably one of the first times in my 17 years that most everybody across the nation is feeling something that's very similar. In other words, like, if you go back to the distress days, there were pockets that were just hammered, and then everybody else was just kind of slowly moving through it. Right now, I feel like every market has kind of the same things going on, where we're obviously all contending with higher rates, which has resulted in greater inventory, property sitting on market a slight bit longer, right? Buyer demand waning a little bit. And that's being felt across the nation. I think that, again, there's certain cities that are feeling it more, but Frank, I don't think I'm saying there's nothing magical in what I'm saying. I think we're all living it, right? Like, it is just a different conversation than it was 9 months ago. And I think from a real estate building perspective, like team building or agent building, a business building perspective, it's a great time. It's a really, I don't want to sound cliche. I know lots of people say, well, when the market's shifting, no, I sincerely believe it. And I'm saying it as a guy that's had the opportunity to build through different market cycles, right? Like, now is a hell of a time for us to get into action.
Got it. So database, right?
Yeah.
Probably the first place you start when the chaos of doing deals settles down. You need more deals, right? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question. We could go on for days on this, right? But
You got about 6 minutes.
right. Well, I think before we get specifically in the database, I think it's really key to recognize that I think something that we also saw when COVID hit, right? Like when all that happened with the pandemic occurred, and it was March and April 2020. What you saw with everybody, Frank, and it was more traumatic, was individuals going through the stages of grief, in my opinion, right? Like you saw the initial shock, and then you had the fear, and then you had the anger,
acceptance,
and then you get to acceptance.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
No, denial. No, it's shock, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. I'm very familiar with this process.
There you go. Yes, as a marketing expert, Frank, I'm sure you're very aware. So my point in sharing that is when you saw it, it was just very pronounced. Like you knew what stage each individual you were talking to was in. I think that there's an element of that at play right now with respect to the real estate market, meaning that you're talking to individuals that are still very much in a state of denial, or now they've shifted into a state of anger. It's the government's fault. Or they've finally gotten to acceptance, meaning that those that need to buy and those that need to sell are going to buy and sell, right? So my first thing before we start talking about how are you going to work your database, or how are you going to cold call, or I think discovery around where is this individual presently sitting right now mentally is really important, because that's going to frame the conversation that you're going to have. Right. So I think action step wise, there has always got to be a discovery, like in your initial conversation, whether it be database or cold call. Tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me what's on your mind. How are you feeling? What's your perspective on the market? What are you hearing from your family or your neighbors? Right. And really, you're just doing a discovery around what's going to come out of this person's mouth next. Like, how are they going to react? Because how you respond and how you market and how you interact is going to be dependent on that. Right.
That's interesting. You can like literally tag every conversation by the stage of grief.
Right now, I believe you can. Now, in a normal market, when there's not this kind of chaos, it's much more difficult. They're probably not in any of the stages. They're just living life. But right now, at this very moment in time, with uncertainty and all, you do see that. And again, it's more pronounced in certain markets, but that's what happens every time there's a shift or change in perspective in terms of what's going on. So start there. Now, as it pertains to database, Frank, I'm talking to a guy that knows database interaction and marketing better than anybody else in the country. So you get this. But I think that I don't think there's any silver bullet here or magical words of wisdom. At the end of the day, in working real estate opportunities, particularly your database, it's a function of consistency, right? Frequency and quality. That's it. I think we overcomplicate all of this, right? Like if you're looking at your database and I say, okay, tell me about the type of interactions you're having. How are you connecting with this database? What's the quality of those conversations? In other words, is what you're saying, doing, marketing, and displaying, is it of value to anybody? Number one, are you valuable? Are you providing quality? Number two, how frequently are you doing this? What's the rate at which you're interacting with this database? And then lastly, are you actually consistent in the method, consistent with your interaction? So you've got high frequency in December, but then you fall off until March. Well, that's not going to work. That's inconsistent. So again, I go back to the quality, I go back to the frequency, and I go to the consistency. Now, I think any plan that matters for all types of leads you're going after, but nothing more than database. Frank, you taught me years ago. You really did. I'm not just saying this as part of hey, here's a way for us to interact in a webinar.
This is a compliment, Brian.
You literally, you were the one that said to me, and I've repeated it. And anybody watching today that's heard me present, you've probably heard me say this. I've claimed it as my own, but I think it came from Frank. And Frank may have even made it up, but it sounded really valuable to me. He said, Brian, when I was working with Frank years ago, he's like, if you're not interacting with people every 17 to 21 days, every few weeks, in some capacity, they will forget who you are and what you do. And Frank, you probably said it much different than that, but that's how I heard it at the time. Bottom line, once you said that, that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, if you're not talking to your customers, someone else is, type of thing.
Yeah, but it wasn't even so much a talking. Yes, talking matters, right? Like we'll talk about kind of the hierarchy of interaction here. So intimate conversation matters. But at the point you were making at that time, Frank, was you've got to be planting the seed. You've got to be letting people know who you are and what it is you do every few weeks, because they'll forget about you, especially with real estate. Like I've done this stupid, math game out here in Phoenix where, I sat down with my team years ago and said, do we recognize, like, let's run out the math, population, quantity of agents. And what you end up finding out is every couple, every husband and wife, typically knows 2 to 3 realtors in Phoenix. Like, it's not like my theory. That's just what the math would indicate. If you've got certain million in population and you've got, 100,000 realtors like we have, you can back into the math, right? This degrees of separation math. And what you find is everybody knows 2 to 3 realtors. They may not be best friends with them, but they know them. So my point in sharing that is, and go back to your markets, you can figure it out. Everybody knows a realtor or 2. So the question, of course, becomes is, what am I going to do to separate myself in some capacity? And going back to the original statement, Frank, if you're not interacting with them every 3 weeks, they forget. So my dream scenario, and I think about this, and the example I'm going to use is like a real one. I'm a big Arizona Cardinal fan, even though we stink. Like, even though the team's garbage this year, I can't help it, Frank. Every week I'm like, this is the week they're going to turn it around. Like, I swear, Frank, this morning I said to somebody, I'll tell you what, the Cardinals are not mathematically out of the playoffs just yet. But I hate them yesterday, so I don't know what's going on. I'm having stages of grief. Okay, so I will go to the Cardinals game on Monday night. This coming Monday night, they have a game. They're likely to lose, but I'm going nonetheless. And if I have been doing my job with my database, if I've been consistent, if I've been had quality, and I've had the frequency, I'm going to inevitably, I will run into somebody at the game. Somebody I know, somebody that I've interacted with in business or personal. And I may not run into them like in the aisle or whatever, but I'm going to see them somewhere in the stadium. I'm going to see them from far away. They're probably going to see me. And I'll get to the point here. If I've been doing my job, that person should see me and they should say, there's Brian, real estate. That's what should go off in their mind. That guy's in real estate. Now, if I walk up and we connect, we run into each other, I don't have to say, hey, what do you think of the real estate market today? Or, hey, what's your real estate game plan for 2023? I don't need to do that because it's already been triggered in their mind. Brian and real estate, they're aligned. They're related. Why? If I've been interacting, if I've been doing what you taught me to do years ago properly, that takes care of itself. That's broad. It's rather generic what I'm saying, but it's not all that complicated. Like, we just fail. We fail in delivering what I described around the messaging.
Well, let me, I got a couple of them, but why don't you give the audience some messages, just some general educational, helpful messages at the moment. These aren't necessarily, call to actions. What if you were to make some helpful videos or send out some helpful insights that are like timely as of this recording, middle of December, what would those be? And I'll share what we found.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious to hear what you found, right? Because I know you've got
I got some good ones too.
Well, you've got the pulse on this. You've been making these, you talk to everyone and you make the
9 million emails a month.
That's insane. You're sending 9 million a month right now.
Yeah.
And not only are you sending 9 million out, you're getting responses back in some capacity. So you've got the pulse on this. I'll tell you from my perspective on it. I will sit down with my people. I'll sit down even with my the agents in my mastermind. And we'll have a conversation around like, what are the points of pain today? Like what are the buyers and the sellers or prospective buyers and sellers? What are they most concerned about? What's keeping them up at night? What's stopping them from listing their property today or from buying a property? I think step one is to get in front of a whiteboard and say, what are the greatest points of pain today?
Yes.
To me, Frank, that becomes your messaging or your video topics or fill in the blank. Okay. So what if I get with my crew today and I say, what are the points of pain? What are they going to share? Sellers are hesitant to go on the market because they don't know where they're going to move to next. Sellers are hesitant to go on the market because they want a certain price and they've been told the market's soft and they're not going to get it. Sellers do not want to go on the market right now because we've all heard this one. If you're a realtor watching this today, we're not going to address this objection. But it's the holidays and it's too chaotic. I'll wait till after the new year, right? Why aren't buyers buying? Well, rates are too high. It's not affordable. I read somewhere that renting is cheaper than buying right now. Or, hey, you know, there's lots of properties on the market, but what I'm being told or what I read somewhere was that all the good ones are taken. Right. So a lot of the objections, by the way, a lot of the pain points, they're the result of this thing, right? Like if you go to like your news section, I haven't done this today. This is a dangerous example here. But if you go to like, if you scroll and go to your news, like, you know, we all have top stories and For You and, you know, what's mine say today? There's something about Ted Lasso, which seems somewhat positive. The other 5 stories on here.
Real estate.
One of them is real estate, but they're all negative, is my point.
Yeah.
They're all negative. You know, some stuff on Trump and his taxes and some stuff on another lawsuit, something on the Supreme Court wrestling over elections. And, you know, it's negative. And, you know, I'm not on that side of the business. I don't fully know, but my guess is there's a lot more clicks on things with negative headlines than those with positive. And this right here is what's controlling the minds of everybody that we're trying to talk to. So when they see a headline, by the way, most people aren't reading these stories. Like I click into them, but even I last like 4 seconds.
Dude, they share on the headline. At BuzzFeed, they
That's
make them write 25 headlines for every article because people share on the headline. They don't read it.
That's right. So if I'm a general consumer, a buyer or seller, I am being more than just influenced by headlines. This is my news source. That's it. That's the extent of my news. And so I share that because when I'm thinking around points of pain, when I'm on the whiteboard, I'm going to pull up like negativity is always going to create, you know, create more buzz. And so my thought is, how do we address these points of pain, but we do so with education, with knowledge, with data. Like that's where a lot of it's coming from. So Frank, again, going back to the original question, because I know I've gone off on a tangent now, it's a whiteboard. What are the points of pain? And now every single thing that I'm working on from that day forward is going to be around how to solve for these respective points of pain. Now, if I'm solving for these respective points of pain, let's go to sellers. I won't be able to get my price. Okay, that's a fair concern, right? Like it's a little bit more competitive.
Let me give you the headline. Can I still get the price I want for my home?
Yes.
That's the title of the video. Send that out. Seller list.
Yeah. Can I still get the price I want? And the answer is going to be yes. And one idea.
Could you imagine that coming across as a headline in an email with a video?
It'd be
and the leads you would get from being able to see who clicked the links?
They're all going to click it. And an answer, one thing that I think we should all be talking about a little bit more, you know, buyers supposedly aren't buying because rates are higher. Well, my question would be, how could you get a buyer a lower rate?
Rate buy downs is number 2.
What's that?
Rate buy down videos. How to buy down the rate.
Rate buy down, creative finance, subject to. Like if I'm a seller and I want to sell my house for $500K and I owe $300 on it and I've got a 3% rate. Now, subject to and all of these creative financing, that's a whole different conversation for another day. I'm just putting some buzzwords out there. There are ways to get buyers into properties at favorable terms. And there are ways for sellers to get 100% of the price they desire if they're willing to be creative as well. Are they willing to carry? Are they willing to do these things? So I think that there's a tremendous amount of interest in alternative paths to home ownership that are not simply go get a 6.5%, 7% interest rate.
How to buy a home in a high interest rate environment, even though it's not, but in their head it is.
That's right. Who wouldn't want to click on that sort of thing? Right. So that sort of messaging, like I go back to sellers don't want to sell because they know they have to buy a house and they're going to have to buy with a higher rate and blah, blah. You know, we mentioned Homeward, right? I'm still heavily involved with Homeward. And while
tell everyone what Homeward does.
So Homeward is the originator of the buy before you sell concept, where Homeward will go in for a seller before the seller lists the home. The agent and their client goes and finds the home that they want to move to. Homeward goes in there, buys it with its cash, Client moves into new home, then lists their old home for sale, sells the old home, rolls the proceeds of that sale into the buyback of the one they've already moved into. So it's a buy a house before you sell. Homeward's actually using its cash to go and buy that home. There's other product lines, buy with cash, and we've got this sell before you list program coming out. Bottom line, it's just Tim Isle, who's a brilliant guy. He just simply says like, hey, it's crazy to me that there's been two ways to buy a home over the past 100 years, conventional mortgage and cash. There should be a dozen other ways to go accomplish these things. Let's go solve that. It was kind of what are the points?
Here's the pain point, and that's how you start a business.
That's how buy before you sell started. I mean, not to bore everybody with the detail, but Tim did that with his own real estate team before Homeward became a company. That was the origination of it. It was solving for a client that wanted to buy a new home, but thought they had to sell their old home first to free up the capital to go do that. And Tim said, no, I'll go buy that home for you. Now, very, very expensive way to make a real estate commission. But it was that experience that prompted the creation of the company. Anyhow, where am I going with this? That's just an alternative path. That was Tim saying, what are the other ways to make this a reality for people? Because if I could solve that, that positions me in a different way than my competition, who's just going to go list your home or help you secure a traditional mortgage through Rocket Mortgage or whoever it may be. So what are the creative paths of home ownership? I think any messaging around that right now, both for buyer and seller, what's a creative way for me to sell to get max price? What are creative ways for me to buy so that I'm not paying astronomical interest rates? I think that these are very compelling messages at this very moment.
For the sake of time, Brian, let me jump in here and give the audience what some of the things they wanted to hear. I want to give you some topics that work really well. So the first thing in the chat that everyone should see is if I had to choose evergreen topics, this is a marketing lingo for these topics work whenever you want in any market. I put them in the chat. Those are the top 24 evergreen topics, a little more seller biased. That's what we all want. There you go. Feel free to use them. And if you just Google the topic, you'll find your answer and just use that for your script. All right. But with specific topics, which obviously aren't evergreen, they're kind of like more market of the moment. Brian, this is an interesting one. Lending on manufactured homes. Hey, if you can't find a home you want because they're too expensive, it's already built, you can build one, but you have to use prefab, which I think is a big trend in American housing. But you have to find a lender that will lend on it. That solves a real pain. Build a brand new house. It's not necessarily a mobile home. It's a pre-manufactured home, right? Rate buy downs. So working with lender to buy down the rate. And seller predictions, my predictions for the real estate market. Like
that's a big one for you right now.
Yeah, like my predictions or a 2023 housing market outlook. Here's what I think is going to happen. I'm your local economist of choice. I'm your local person. Here's what I think is going to happen. And if you really want to be crazy, is you go back every single year and you compare if your predictions are correct in the next video every year, every December. But we find those people really like seeing those, just some general ones. But the evergreen ones work great. And then I want to move also into really quick, just for the sake of time. Brian, let's talk about if you needed to send out a message that generated leads. What are those messages? I'll give a couple. Hey, home prices may have changed. You want to know what your home is worth? Click here, put your information in, find out your home value. Hey, the buyer pool is dried up. Do you want an immediate off-market cash offer on your home? Request one here. 3, hey, are you uncertain of what's going on with the economy and inflation, elections, and everything else? And do you want I want a little bit of a guidance on where the housing market is going? And answering commonly asked questions to selling and buying a home, get a free ticket to my home selling webinar. Those were really good, right? On the buy side, hey, would you like to get notified of properties that you don't see online? You get on my VIP home buyer list. There's some nuances with that with the MLS rules. All right. Hey, would you like to search all homes for sale and see what's available? Click here to search for homes. And then on the other buyer side, buy before you sell. Generating leads on the Homeward side. So those are messages that you can craft an email, send that out, and it drives back to some type of landing page to generate a lead. Anything you want to add to that?
4 out of the 6 or so that you listed, Frank, I think they're good in any market. Like you kind of went back to the basics on some of that.
Yeah.
Right? Like we should, which is awesome, which is great to hear. We should always be having what's my home market, what's my home's value type of messaging out there. That's always appealing. It's always been for me. It's always been appealing. Would you like to see properties before everybody else, or whatever the variation that's compliant?
Like get in my VIP buyer list.
That stuff goes back to like, the Craig Proctor days. I mean, that sort of thing, that's always appealing. Everybody wants to feel like they got.
Even back in the day, I think you guys were running the shorter stay. Should I short sell my house or stay?
Back in the day, I ran a website, Frank, and I know you'll love this one. My radio message was howshortami.com. And it was a home valuation.
I love it.
You plugged in your mortgage amount, and then we computed a home value automatically, whatever.
Yeah.
And it would show you how far upside down you were on your house.
Perfect for Phoenix back in 08.
And the kicker was how short am I, which Frank, I'm not exactly a super tall guy.
I like it.
How short am I? And that was my #1 lead creator.
I believe
for 5 years. That website and radio ad around it.
I'm surprised I didn't know that. It took me all these years for you to tell me. That's great.
I ran howshortami.com in Portland, Seattle, and Phoenix, and it was my #1 lead source for 5 or 6 years. It was crazy.
For sake of time, I want to ask you a question. How many calls a day are your agents making or your ISAs making to set appointments? Talk to me about the intensity of that.
Well, that's a really good question. And I will tell you, Frank, that my thoughts and my process around that has evolved tremendously over the years. For a variety of reasons. I've been cold call on dialer, with ISA department. I have gone strictly database with agents. I've run lots of different models.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you where I've landed as of today, or really the past couple of years. I stopped looking at quantity of calls to the extent I once did, and quantity of dialer time and all of that to the extent I once did. And I moved to my primary metric, the metric I care most about, and that's applicable for everybody watching today, regardless of your mechanism of lead generation. Contacts. I think contacts is the primary metric.
Define a contact.
What's that?
Define a contact.
Define a contact. It's literally like it sounds. For me, it is somebody that engages with you over the phone beyond just the who are you, hang up. So they've got to engage at least in some level of conversation, even if that conversation is no, I'm not interested at this time. It can't just be a hang up and you heard a voice. It's got to be, hey, Frank, what's going on? It's Brian from Keller Williams calling you. Hey, just wanted to check in on you. What's your real estate game plan for 2023? And if you say to me, Brian, we really are not looking to do anything, and then I ask a series of questions, but it goes nowhere, that's a contact for me. So my #1 metric is contacts. Again, that's universally applied. If you run an open house model, contacts can be your number. If you run calls, obviously contacts can be your number. If you're database, if you're SOI, if you're a door knocker, contacts are applicable. Okay.
Give me your appointment goal.
Give me.
I want to hear your appointment goal. So contacts lead to appointments. What's that number?
Well, okay. So here's where it gets tricky. Again, I'm trying to speak to everybody in the audience. The quality of those initial contacts is going to dictate the quality, or the quantity, I should say, of the appointments, the conversion rate. Right. So if you're in my model today, I believe that for every 8 to 10 contacts they should at the very least be able to set up some sort of either phone appointment or ideally face-to-face appointment. Again, how you define appointment. That's why it's so dangerous to get on a Facebook group and start asking people about conversion, because what's your definition of appointment? Right? Like I just mentioned phone appointment, or is Zoom appointment count?
Yeah, or is it's like a meeting?
Right? Like, is a meeting like if someone calls on a sign and wants to see a property? If you go there, does that count? Or do you have to fully qualify them? And my point is that in my model today, you get 8 to 10 contacts. I expect you to have some sort of appointment that talks specifically about your plan of action.
Is that the standard 8 to 10 contacts a day for your agents?
That is for me.
That is
now that is a lower rate let me rephrase that. That is a higher conversion rate that I used to work off of when I was strictly cold call prospecting. Cold call prospecting had an even lower conversion rate, meaning you had to get a lot more contacts to get that quantity of appointment. You follow me? So the higher the quality of those contacts, maybe a better way to describe this, if I'm running an open house model, and that's exclusively what I do, every contact I have, Frank, is face-to-face. The quality of that contact is dramatically higher than any phone call you can make. Like, that's just fact, right? So that's why I say it's dangerous to get lost in those numbers. For me, if I see 8 to 10, if I have somebody that does 20 contacts a day, I think they're able to set 1 to 2 decent appointments based on my definition of appointment. Now, I do want to say this, and I want to make sure that if contacts are the universal metric we're all using, I want to say, number one, I look at contacts and I think every agent should be able to define exactly how many contacts they want to get each and every day, and should therefore be able to tell me whether they're winning or losing each and every day. Right? Like, I think too often as agents and as team owners, if I ask you, today, at the end of the day, Frank, and you're an agent, I call you today and I say, Frank, it's 6 o'clock, out your way, your day's through, your business day's through. Did you win or lose today? Most agents are going to give me a rather subjective emotional response. Well, it feels like I won today. I mean, I had like a lot of good energy today. I mean, had a couple good conversations. And I say, that's great. That's a terrible way to measure whether you're winning or losing. Now, Frank, if your contact goal was 12 and it's 6 o'clock and I call you and I say, Frank, did you win or lose today? And you're married to that 12. If you had an 11, you lost. If you had a 13, you won. Good. Right? So I like that contact level. I also know that if you define 12 as your victory for the day, right? And 6 o'clock rolls around and you're at 11. I'd like to believe, Frank, knowing you're not going to take an L for the day if you're 1 or 2 or 3 contacts off. You're going to go knock 3 doors. You're going to make 3 more phone calls, right? Like, if you're holding an open house, you're going to keep it open an extra half hour, right? So I use contacts and I like to look at it as winning or losing the day. The last thing I like to talk around this is that, and I already alluded to it earlier, face-to-face is more valuable than anything else. Yet we as agents have a tendency to default to the wrong end of the hierarchy. In other words, if I'm going to rank things, face-to-face is the most intimate interaction we could have and is of greatest value. It's highest rate of conversion. From face-to-face, maybe it's Zoom. From Zoom, it's down to phone call. From phone call, maybe it's down to text. From text, it's down to, call it, email. From email, maybe it's down to like note card. Okay. Well, we have a tendency, instead of to default to the most intimate interaction, the one that's going to get us the highest rate of success, we tend to start it like email. And maybe, just maybe, I'll shoot a video. And maybe, just maybe, I'll send a text. If they don't respond to the text, I'll make that phone call. And that's totally ass backwards. Now, when you do video, when you do market, when you do text, those are all things, those are all tools to use to drive to a face-to-face. That's the end game, not the one and only way to convert business. Every video Frank, you just rattled off 8 amazing video topics. And what do those video topics do? They generate eyeballs. People watch. Okay. And what's the most valuable tool? What's the most valuable things that comes of that video, Frank, that I know you guys are able to.
Well, the click list. I mean, it's
the list. It's the click list. And what are people supposed to do with that click list? Call it. And when they call them, what are they supposed to do from there?
I mean, try to get an appointment.
Drive to face-to-face appointment, right? So like marketing, like you're doing, is a setup for the face-to-face. It's not the isolated event so if you don't have a complete system, you're going to fail. Right? They all got to play together to drive to a face-to-face. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm just so fired up about that because
it's been your whole life. It's been your whole career.
We as agents, we tend to be lazy. And the truth of the matter is, right now, like the past couple of years, we could afford to do that. I'm not telling you anything. I'm not, everyone's saying this right now. It's nothing. Right now is the time you double your lead generation efforts to get the same results you've had the past 2 years. It's just fact.
Right. We got to keep moving. If I needed money if I need to make money now, I would go to Brian's team or I'd go to my own list. But just for the sake of this conversation, Brian, I would come to you and say, Brian, give me your Gmail contacts, give me everybody in your cell phone, give me everybody in your CRM. I'm going to start hammering with emails and messaging with the topics talked about today. Great. That's going to like filter down who's actually interested in real estate content. And then I'm going to start reaching out to all of them and trying to book appointments. I mean, your best contact rate will probably be people that have recently opted into web forms and people that are engaging with the stuff that you're sending out about real estate.
Well, and I want to, you said something right there. And I think, again, it's something we lose sight of. You said your best contact rate. Recognize that, like, if you just cold call a list, I'm not saying to do that, be compliant, whatever. Take it from me. I've spent some time and money on some of these things. That's a conversation for another day. But you're 8 to 10% contact rate at best. If you're able to call a list that's been warmed up now with video or whatever it may be, you will go from 8 to 10% to 20 to 30%. And that literally will take your call list. You know, you could call a third the amount of people to contact the quantity that we're talking about. I just think like contact rates and things like that, it matters. Like these things need to be, we need to run businesses, like truly run businesses. And these are the metrics that matter. So Warren, for sure.
Brian, how does someone get involved with Metrix or Homeward?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. On the Metrix side, Frank, I think you threw the URL up, metrixmasterminds.com. Just reach out to us. We run a mastermind. We meet quarterly. It's Ben Kinney and myself. We meet quarterly. We run things every month. We provide what we think to be tons of value. As a matter of fact, we have an event this week here in Scottsdale. We bounce around the country, but naturally are a little biased to Arizona and Washington, which is where Ben and myself where we're located. We've got a real killer group. And if in fact you qualify and you're at that level, we'd love to invite you, into the room and at least check it out. So you can find out about Metrix Masterminds right at the website. Homeward, same sort of thing. Homeward is in a slew of states. Many of those here today were in your state, just based on the math. We were able to service about half the country right now in terms of realtors. Go check out homeward.com. We have our partner leads, our outside salespeople in your area. They've probably been in your respective brokerages already, but look it up. Here's the thing, Frank, like with Homeward and all of the other companies out there, right? Like I think we as agents, we got to show up knowing all of the solutions, not only available to our sellers, but that they're also and buyers, but that they're also already online looking at. Right? Like this isn't 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, Frank, when we used to send like when I first started working with you years ago, we'd send a message out and people in my database actually thought that Brian Gubernick had written them a personal email. Like things have evolved. People are onto us now, right? Like they know, but also know that they have access to everything at their fingertips. We all know this via the internet.
Like this webinar is live. It's not pre-recorded.
Right. This one is live. Yeah. So the point though here is that you've got to be educated around all of these things. Like let's take Homeward, for example. If you're like, I don't know if that's for me. I'll tell you what, I know what the site traffic looks like. Homeward is not a direct to consumer company, yet our site traffic is astronomical. Why? Because your clients are looking at it. They want to know what options are available to them. So I encourage you to become more educated around all of these things. You should know iBuying. You should know buy before you sell offers. You should know creative finance. That's what makes you an expert in what you do. Right? We always throw this term, this economist of choice. Like we've got to be the purveyor of all things. Yeah, but take it seriously. Like that doesn't mean you just like read the Wall Street Journal today and now you're the freak. I know, Frank. I get hey, I'm 44 years old next week, dude. This is what we do, man. I sit down with my pipe and my
pipe, yeah.
Yeah, my mahogany.
You still have that AOL email address?
I just got rid of it, but I still use my Hotmail from time to time.
Your Net Zero or Juno? Remember those?
Oh man, yeah. Point is though, go out there and study.
Why don't you, Brian? Normally I would talk a little bit about viral marketing, but last minute, can you tell them about viral?
I will tell them about viral, Frank. Because I've worked with you for some time now, and I'll put my spin on this, Frank. And this is the truth, right? You hold me accountable to this. I was a very difficult guy to start working with because I'm difficult as it is, period. But I was especially difficult because, as you may recall, Frank, I had said to you, I don't understand this marketing thing. I don't understand marketing because I have an accounting background. I'm a numbers guy. And so I said, Frank, prove to me that prove to me conversions, prove to me all this. And you're like, Brian, that's not, yeah, I can give you some data, but that's not how this works. And I'm like, I don't know. And you're like, hey, you're going to have to trust me on this. Like, take my word for it. We will drum up energy. We'll drum up contact lists. We'll do these things through our video marketing and these other tools that you have available, and the education that you provide. And you said, trust me. And I went into it. I was pretty hesitant because I'm like, prove it out. And we partnered, and you started running, driving content for me, and your company started not just driving it, but educating me, not just again on topics, but even how to deliver the messaging, how call to action looks, like what conversion looks like. Like, here's what I know you know sales, Brian, but here's what marketing looks like, and it's different. And I will tell you rather immediately, it created an entirely new lever, and lead generation lever, I should say, within my business. Because while I was working my database, it was kind of like this: you got to attack from air, land, and sea. And I was only working, the air and land. And you introduced the sea component by coming at it from a different angle and then giving me the data, the call list that I then was responsible to go take action on. And it became a beautiful partnership as a result. So I think for all of those out there today, if you're trying to figure out how to connect with your database beyond just the simple text, phone call, and auto email that's generated by your CRM, but connect with them with item of value and actually deliver something that they care about, you might want to connect with Frank and crew.
I appreciate that, Brian.
Thank you.
I'm gonna drop your email address for everyone here as we wrap this up. If anyone has any questions, and I'm also gonna put my email address in the chat. All right. You'll have access to a replay of this. If not already watching up on YouTube, we'll get up on YouTube. And if there's anything here, you have a question for us, email us. And hope you guys really enjoyed the webinar. And Brian, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
All right, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.